As Americans, we are strong and we are resilient. And when tragedy strikes, when we take a hit, we pull together and we draw on what's best in our character. Our optimism, our commitment to each other, our commitment to our values, our respect for one another. We stand up and we rebuild and we recover and we emerge stronger than before. That's who we are.
President Barack Obama brought the world together this week, or as much of the world who cares to be seen cavorting with Americans, convinced he knows how to bring ISIS terrorism to its knees. This, of course, without using pointed words and creating a new line of rhetoric. So now let's dig into the meat of what he is proposing. Our guest is the senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation, a career Army officer with high-level Department of Defense policy-making experience. He understands those Middle Eastern governments we are working with and are seeking to bend to our will. Rick Brennan is here on MidPoint. Rick, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for inviting me, Ed.
Rick, let's get right to the president's ideas here. He seems to be going along with the idea that we've heard now, fostered by some of his lackeys, if you will, the last couple of days, that the way to defeat ISIS, the way to defeat terrorism, is to provide jobs for the people on the ground. Is he on target or is he delusional?
No, I think the idea of getting jobs for these radical Islamists is it will be not effective at the least. And one of the things we do need to do is we do need to counter the ideology, but it's broader than that. It's countering the ideology. It's fighting the ideology. It's destroying the what I would call a theology of revolution that is being espoused by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS and the leadership of al-Qaeda. This is what we need to be targeting, but we also need to be targeting these terrorist organizations, the large number of groups that are now estimated to be in excess of 50 around the world, and it's going to require military action to do that.
He also seemed to indicate, at least in his speech, that there was an idea here to work with many governments in here, to almost be hand in hand with all these governments. But what struck me is a lot of these governments that he's talking about, they have their own human rights abuses, they have their own issues on the ground with terrorists and with other religious fanatics, if you will. Is it fair to say that when he talks about working with these people, these governments, it's nearly impossible when you consider what goes on the ground and that ideology that each holds dear?
Absolutely, and this is a very challenging issue that we're going to have to confront. The problems in the countries of the Middle East, each one of those countries, our allies, our friends and allies, as well as those who have been opposed to many of the things that we do, have their own internal challenges with radical Islam. These countries, in some regards, have turned a blind eye to what they were doing in order to keep them immune from the backlash so they could remain in power. So we have to work with those governments to change, to confront their own challenges, to make certain that it's not spreading. And the other thing I'd like to comment on, Ed, is that we've been talking so much about ISIS and the type of threat that it's posing in the Middle East, but I would suggest that there's also a Shia version of this, and that Shia version it looks like the revolutionary Islamic revolutionary government in Tehran, and that is just that theology, the revolutionary theology, is just as as threatening from the Shia side as it is from the Sunni side. And while the wolf at the sled is currently ISIS, the other wolf that we need to be worried about is Iran, and I don't think we're ever paying enough attention to that.
Richard, I got about a minute left here before we take a break, but it was wonderful theater. It certainly was a good idea to bring everybody together, but if we get right down to brass tacks here, is it fair to say that much of this President's Summit on extremism was really just for naught? It was wonderful theater, but it simply is not going to get anything done substantive?
We've brought a lot of the community into the field, but we aren't going to see a significant amount of change unless the President takes a holistic approach to this and truly develops a strategy, what I would call a grand strategy, that much like we had the strategy containment, we need something like that for our generation.
We're wasting time here, aren't we?
I think we are.
And that, of course, is the problem when you don't have a whole lot of time, when these people are now talking about going to Italy and so many other places around the world. Stick around just a couple of minutes here, Richard. We're going to take a break. We're going to be back after that break. Let's dive into the truce that isn't a phony peace deal. and there's a country that wants their weapons back. But let's also not forget one more thing we have to think about here with regard to the president's decision on ISIS. There is a country in the Middle East that we need to be working with, considered to be an ally. However, all of a sudden in the last 24 hours, it seems we and the ally are not seeing eye to eye. We'll have that and so much more when we continue right here on MidPoint, where we question everything. Back to work with senior political analyst at the RAND Corporation, where they offer research and analysis to the American Armed Forces. Rick Brennan joins us. All right, Rick, let's get one more thing talking about ISIS here. Apparently, America is not backing Egypt in this because apparently the Egyptians went in with their airstrikes, did not tell the Americans. The American military is very unhappy here. Is this a tempest in a teapot here, or does this portend something a little deeper in the relationship between America and Egypt right now?
Our relationship with Egypt is extremely strained as a result of the administration's backing of the Muslim Brotherhood and the democratization, in quotes, that took place. President Sisi is very suspicious of us, and that's unfortunate because he is one of those people who I think can make a significant inroads as we're trying to defeat the ideology that we're talking about. He's also committed to using his military, much like King Abdullah in Jordan. We need to be working with these types of leaders in the Middle East to get them to work with us and in coordination with us, understanding that their efforts at democratization and working on human rights issues may not be exactly what we prefer in the United States, but also realize that they're our best friends in the region.
Well, let's go back to a certain point here. Is it not true that the president at one time maybe did not come right out and say it, but he did intimate that in the war against ISIS, America really didn't need Egypt, and then all of a sudden ISIS became much stronger, much more on the offense. So really, in many ways, we had to go almost with our hat in our hand to Egypt, yes?
We absolutely did. I mean, when the Arab Spring took place, started in 2011, the United States diplomatically jumped on board with all those movements throughout the region. And unfortunately, many of those movements were targeting governments with whom we have had friendly relations for 30 or 40 years. And so since that point, and now that Egypt is back and has really taken on the hard issue of challenging ISIS, I think we need to fundamentally look at our regional policy and develop a regional strategy that incorporates all of these friends, and understanding that we're going to have differences, but without them, we cannot defeat ISIS.
There is a report out there, switching gears to another terrorist group, that the Afghan Taliban were perhaps trying to create some peace talks with the United States. The Taliban thus far, they've denied it completely, but it still kind of simmers out there. Where do you think the truth is?
I think the truth is that the United States, working with the government of Afghanistan, is trying to work on issues of reconciliation to bring the Taliban into the fold so that when we leave, as the president has promised to do in 2016, that it won't create a huge void in power that the Taliban can exploit. I'm not certain where this is going to lead. I think it's a dangerous precedent to stake. Having said that, without some sort of reconciliation effort, without that government that we've established in Kabul is not likely to stand after we depart.
Let's talk about something else potentially dangerous here. Libya has now asked the United Nations Security Council to lift the arms embargo so they say they can fight the ISIS militants and others. How dangerous is this? Because it just seems to me that when you're putting more weapons in the hand of Libya, you are asking for trouble.
At this point, I think we have to really look hard at Libya. Most of the territory that once was under the control of the Libyan government is now ungoverned land that is governed by tribes. ISIS has parts of it and other groups. I would be very reluctant to try to re-engage in arming that government at this point without seeing some significant efforts to reform and, more importantly, demonstrate that they're able to use those weapons accurately. And remember when we had our problems in Libya in the Benghazi attack, the government didn't exactly assist our efforts in what we needed to do. So I think we have to go in this clear-eyed in terms of what type of government we're facing.
Richard, about a minute or so left here. Let's go ahead and switch gears to someplace else. The Ukraine, the peace treaty and the peace agreement certainly didn't last long at all because the fighting is still raging in eastern Ukraine at this point. It would seem as if, again, this was nothing more than a stall tactic by the Russians, and maybe the United Nations is in here. They're trying to keep the UN out as well, keep everybody out, but they'll have peace, Go back and fight. Peace. Go back and fight. You want to talk about a situation you can't win. It would seem again that Putin is simply playing the West.
Putin is clearly playing the West, and he's playing for time, and we have been unable to counter his efforts. It's been alarming to see the degree to which he's been able to make the moves, put in a request for a pause. We grant it to him, and then as soon as we grant it to him, he allows his forces or proxies to take the next step. This is a very dangerous situation, and if you look at a resurgent Russia, this is something that, again, another major challenge that has come up on President Obama's watch that is going to be around with us for years to come.
Maybe if the president would actually use the words extremism and others and terrorists, maybe we'd get more work done. But then again, that's just a guess from the outside here as people are starting to criticize and have been criticizing a lot of his actions here. Rick Brennan, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks so much. We'll look forward to doing it again.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right, my pleasure. They were a flashpoint for an entire nation. Every eye, every night was on Ferguson, Missouri. It was the one that we simply had to watch constantly to find out what was happening. But what is life like there with the cameras gone, and now the Justice Department has decided that they may indeed be bearing down on Ferguson and the police department? We'll talk with the former mayor, who is determined to bring Ferguson back. That's when we continue right here on MidPoint.